All right, today we are going to be talking about subtracting expressions. Remember that we can think of subtracting in expressions, we can think of that like a negative. Because the way we're going to actually think about this, we're going to think about subtracting expressions like we are distributing a negative. And a lot of times that will be a -1. So we're going to talk about that here. So if we have a subtraction sign before parentheses, we distribute a negative. And if it's just a subtraction sign like here, it's going to be a -1. If there's a number with it, then we're going to distribute the number with the negative. But if we have this right here, if I were to rewrite this, I would have 14x. And think of this as, you're like, oh, -1, but it's not just -1 because that 1 or that negative is right up against the parentheses. So that actually means that we need to distribute it. So we're going to distribute that negative. So we are taking care of this part right here first. So it's like that 14x isn't there for just a second. I'm going to distribute this -1 times 7x and -1 times 2. Well, you'll notice that anytime you distribute a -1, you actually are finding the opposite of those numbers. So the opposite of positive 7x is -7x. And the opposite of 2 is -2. Now it's -2 and we write it as -2. Now we're going to bring that 14x back down. And we go, oh, wait a minute. Now I have some like terms. So now, if we split those up into terms, we have 3 terms, and 2 of them are like. So I have 14x and a -7x. So when I combine those, I get 7x. And then we still have the -2. It didn't have anybody in common, so there were no like terms with the 2. So we got 7x minus 2 for our answer. And we're just going to work through some examples down here is all we're going to do. So like I said, we in our class have been going through and we have been talking about dividing them up into terms. So the first thing we're going to do here, remember we have that -1 and we're going to distribute that -1. Well, remember what I said, the only thing that's happening there is I'm finding the opposites of the numbers. So the opposite of 3x is -3x and the opposite of 2 is -2 or -2. Now we still have this part out here, and once we distribute that negative, we're just going to get rid of all the parentheses there. So now I have 12x plus 7 minus 3x minus 2. When I go through and I separate this up, I'm going to see that I have some like terms. I have the 12x and the 3x. So I can pull that over here and say 12x minus 3x. Well, that gives me 9x. And then I've got a positive 7 and a -2. So 7 minus 2 is 5. And since it's a positive 5, then it's plus 5. The same thing's going to happen over on this one and this one, only this one we're not going to distribute just a negative. We are distributing a -2. So we'll see how this is similar and different at the same time. Now this one over here, I added that 1 in. I don't need to do that here because I already have it's a 2. So I'm going to take care of this first. Just like over here, I took care of this first. Nothing's happening over here to these numbers in these parentheses. They just put them in there to kind of separate them out. And I can't do 5x plus 5. But it's like there's a positive 1 here, and when I multiply by that positive 1, it's just going to come out of the parentheses. Nothing special is going to happen to it. Now over here, I'm distributing a -2. And when I distribute that -2, I will do -2 times 13x. And then I will do -2 times -1. And in our class, we don't think of that as -1. We like to think of it as -1. I feel like when you think of it as -1, you tend to lose the negative. When I do -2 times 13, I'm going to get -26x. So I'm going to have minus 26x. Let's take this down just a little bit further here with our rewrite. So we have 5x plus 5, and then we have minus 26x. And then right here, negative 2 times negative 1 is just going to be 2, so plus 2. I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to separate these into their terms. And when I do that, make sure that the sign stays with the number. So like terms that we have here, we have a 5x and a negative 26x. Well, 5x and negative 26x is going to give me negative 21x. And then we have a positive 5 and a positive 2. So when I combine those like terms, I get 7, and it's a positive 7. And there's our answer to that one. Our next one here, notice how there's a plus sign. So since it's a plus sign, it's like I'm multiplying by positive 1, which is what the same thing we were doing out here. Well, when I multiply times a positive 1, nothing changes. So over here, when I multiply times a positive 1, nothing changes as well. So when I separate back out into terms, I have a 2x and a 3x, which combine for a 5x. And I have a negative 7 and a negative 9, which is negative 16, so it'll be 5x minus 16. With our next one, I'm going to be distributing a negative 3, and I'm going to box that in to remind myself that I need to take care of that first. There's the distributive property. I cannot do 4x minus 3. Couldn't do that anyway, but I noticed that the 3 is right next to the parenthesis there, so it means I'm going to need to distribute it. So I'm going to do negative 3 times 5x, and then I'm going to do negative 3 times 1. I get negative 15x minus 3, and then I cannot forget to bring my 4x down. And then I'm going to take my pencil, and I'm going to separate out my terms, and then I'm going to identify my like terms there. They have the same variable. If I have 4 x's and 15 negative x's, I have more negative x's, so I have 11 more negative x's. Now I have my minus 3. There's nothing else to go with it. That's the only constant. So my final answer is negative 11x minus 3. This next one down here, like I told you, is very similar to that first one we did. So I'll use a nice bright pink here so we can see it. There's a negative 1 here that we need to distribute. Negative 1 gives me the opposite of everything that's in there. So the opposite of negative x would just be x. And the opposite of positive 7 would just be a negative 7 or minus 7. Remember, it's like there's a 1 here, which doesn't change anything at all. That x, when we did that, it gave us a positive x, and so that's how I know I'm adding. Split up my terms and look for like terms here. I've got 5 x's and another x. So 5x plus x is going to be 6x. And then I have a negative 9 and a negative 7 for negative 16, so minus 16. Our last example here, we've actually got the distributive property going on twice. So the distributive property is happening on this set of terms, and the distributive property is happening with these set of terms. So I'm going to do 3 times negative 6x, and I'm going to do 3 times 7, which gives me negative 18x and a positive 21. I'm going to move back to this one, and I'll have negative 4 times 3x, and I will have negative 4 times negative 5. So I'm going to get a negative 12x, and I'm going to get a positive 20. going to separate out those terms. So I'm at 4 terms, and I realize, wait a minute, there are some that are like terms. So I can simplify this even further. So negative 18x and negative 12x are going to give me negative 30x as part of my final answer. And then I'm going to have a positive 21 and a positive 20. And when I combine those, I'm going to get a 41, and it's a positive 41, so plus 41. So take a look at those. It's the distributive property and combining like terms. And there were just some examples where we had negatives. And if you see those parentheses, what to do with those parentheses. And let us know if you have any questions.